So I don't know if you caught John's talk yesterday, but he said, I think what gets people at Square out of bed in the morning are bakeries and coffee shops. So I told him I would ask you that first question. But I think the real question is, you know, it seems like this is becoming a crowded space, reinventing payments in the physical world. How do you think, like, is there room for a Stripe and a Square, and name the other 5, 6, 10 competitors?
So first of all, it's a massive space. So omnichannel itself, the ability to take your payment to actually enact commerce, whether it's online, offline, in a marketplace, on voice recognition, whether it's the lovely lady upstairs who was putting on some makeup for you, Jason. Sorry, I feel like I need to bring that up, but a great example.
She told me I needed
of a
2 times the amount, yes.
Of a sole proprietor, right, that needs payments, all the way to some of the largest brands in the world. There's a ton of space. So what we've seen in the US is today even 50% of businesses effectively don't take electronic payments. So there's about 21 million small to mid-sized businesses that are open for business to get onto electronic rails. We see the same thing in the UK, about 1.7 trillion pounds of just revenue going across small business points of sale. So there's a lot of greenfield. And every business, from that sole prop all the way up to the Walmarts of the world, knows that omnichannel is in their future, that they're going to have to be in all those places. And so what gets us up in the morning is making sure we can handle all that commerce.
Okay, and so that means, you know, we've seen over the years in your public financial reports that the percentage of your business that comes from merchants that are, say, 250 or 500,000 a year in annual sales keeps growing and growing.
It does.
What is the end goal there? Like, how big are you going after in terms of merchant size?
So I don't know if we see a cap anymore. We think we can go to the biggest businesses in the world. And one of the ways we've done that in the last few years is to really open up the platform and to build a series of APIs that anyone can code to. So if you want to do something innovative at your point of sale, one example sometimes I use with analysts is the North Face. They want to do a pop-up at a ski resort where, you know, I've lost my glasses, or I really need a hat, it's a little bit colder, I want those hand warmers. We want to make sure they can enact commerce right there at the lift. And what they don't want to do is recreate their whole back-end ERP system, supply chain, and so on. So in that case, they can just tug on an API from Square to help carry a payment. There are other examples where it might not always...
And that pop-up's good enough for you? You're not trying to take that pop-up and have that an entry point?
I would like their whole business. We see businesses that do $100 million plus on Square today, so we're certainly not capped from a size perspective. And then, of course, it's not just about a payment. I think our learning in the last few years, and the acquisition we did of Weebly, I think has really reinforced this, is commerce is a continuum, right? It usually starts with discovery, help people find my product, find my business, help them get educated to know what to buy. Then you probably move into a shopping cart sort of scenario where a payment gets taken. Then they want to do fulfillment, and then maybe there's a return or a refund that ends it. There may even be things like reviews and so on. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about that whole continuum. And on the API piece, we offer not just a payment API, but things like customers or inventory or an instant deposit. Whatever the pieces of Square that are right for your business, we want to make sure we've exposed those and that you're able to do that code to our platform.
So you mentioned Weebly quickly, which I'm going to describe it as content software, but also e-commerce software company as well. That was an acquisition.
Yeah.
How are you making these decisions on acquisition versus partner as you try to fill all the parts of the ecosystem?
So as you can imagine at our scale, so you mentioned Omni, and we really look at 3 pieces of our business. Omni, banking services, and international. I'm sure you'll come to the latter too. But in every case, when we want to do something new, we think about build, buy, partner. I think a big unlock for Square in the last probably 3-4 years now has been a willingness to build this open platform. So there will be places where we do first party, and there'll be places where we do third party. So in the omnichannel vein, we have been working with Weebly, but also Wix, BigCommerce, GoDaddy, think about all of the website builders. And we do that because we recognize that our sellers want choice. And for some of them, one particular platform works better than another, and we don't want to tell them what they should do. We want to make sure it's open for them.
That wasn't always the way at Square, though, right?
No, for sure. I mean, when I joined about 6.5 years ago, we're not that old as a company, we're hitting 9 years. But there was definitely we wanted to build it all end to end because we wanted to really control the experience. And if you think about Square in the early days, it was a beautiful experience where we really reinvented a kind of a nasty, couldn't get on the system, you had to work with all these different vendors, and instead you came to Square, you got the reader, you were able to take the payment, you sent a digital receipt, and it was all for a single price, felt really easy and transparent. But as we got bigger, to your point about how big can it go, we've recognized that many sellers are going to bring other pieces of that party to play themselves, and our goal is to work with the right partners to unlock for them. On the buy front, I mean, we haven't done a ton of acquisitions, frankly, as a company. We'll always look, but I think our preference is still, we want to make sure underneath that the data layer is cohesive. And a big part of our strength as a company has been the ability to, for example, take payment data in the point of sale and offer small businesses access to capital through our lending product, or be able to take data that's running in our digital receipt and turn that into a loyalty program. So the more we can keep cohesion of the data, the stronger the whole ecosystem gets. And so that's where when you do buy, you need to be careful that you can really integrate it in so that it's truly still a cohesive
In terms of big
ecosystem.
acquisitions, besides Weebly, there was Caviar when you were still a private company, right? Food delivery company.
Yeah.
And that's
really
lots
of tuck-ins. We'll look for great technologists, great data scientists. We'll look all over the world for that. But that's much more of a talent acquisition vehicle rather than per se bringing on a new business.
Let's talk about the consumer side of your business for a while, which I've long been skeptical of, as you know, and I think talked with Jack Dorsey about as well. For a while, the question was why even do consumer business? You've made some announcements about how big the cash service. Mm-hmm. I still want to call it Square Cash because for people who don't know, I still think it's confusing. Your Square Cash services, which earlier this year I think you said 7 million monthly users, active users. Mm-hmm. I find people on the coast, which are a lot of people I talk to day to day, they're heavy Venmo users, and so I get from a ton of people, like, who are those 7 million people? And I know you're asked this, but I'm going to ask you again. Who are the people who are the daily users of that service?
So Cash App, we kind of shifted the branding. Hopefully everyone here is utilizing Cash App today.
Who uses the Cash App?
That's actually not bad. There you go. There's the beginning point of my 7 million monthly actives.
Okay.
So
you have some work to do on this.
The Cash App, don't worry. By the time you all leave, because I'm always hustling, you're all going to download it right now and try it out. So Cash App's premise really started out more with the underbanked, with a view that there are 30 million households in the United States that are unbanked or underbanked. It's kind of shocking. The thing we take for granted, the ability to get access to a DDA, a demand deposit account, they cannot get access to it. It's too expensive. They can't hold a minimum balance. They feel out of control when things like they go overdrawn by $1 and they get charged $30. So Cash App really came about beginning with P2P, but we said this is a way to bring people up and on the system. So it's very analogous to what we did with Square in the beginning, where we work with those small businesses who never got up onto electronic rails. And so it started as a P2P app, but very quickly we've shifted it to hold a balance, so it starts to feel more like an account. With that balance, you get access to a card.
Like a bank account, almost.
Like a bank account, almost, yeah. It has a card associated with it today, so you get a beautiful debit card that you can take to an ATM. You can use anywhere that Visa is accepted. You can use it online and offline, and that's what people are doing. So in June, we saw $250 million just on the Cash App debit card, physical and virtual together. But $250 million, it's about $3 billion annualized. And they're spending everywhere you'd expect. They spend at Walmart, they spend at McDonald's, they spend at Uber, they spend at Netflix. It's all the big places that spending's happening. So it's really not just by the coasts, although we love the coasts too, but we actually see this being used really across mainstream America.
Are there geographically in the US, are there areas where you're heavily strong in this?
So interestingly, our kind of real ground zero for it was Atlanta, Georgia, which speaks to a demographic that really needs to be served. But I think beyond that underbanked segment where we kind of began strategically, we've definitely seen now the rise of digital natives, like folks who want their banking type app or their financial app to kind of work with them, to work on the device that they're used to using every day, and to start we're just adding more and more utility to it as the app itself becomes more prolific.
So the one feature that has actually gotten me to use this physical debit card that I don't gain any points for or anything is what you call Boost, but it's essentially a discount, a merchant, mostly merchant-specific discounts.
Yeah.
And right now, I think there's 10% off at Chipotle or Shake Shack, Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I'm like, those are big discounts. And it turns out right now, you guys are funding these discounts. So what's like, how long can you do that for, and why are you funding these discounts at the start?
So it goes back to that comment about utility. You've onboarded through P2P, so you've sent me $100, and we want to give you a reason to hold it sitting in that balance. So we gave you the card, we gave you the ability to do things like attach it to your routing number, so you can put your paycheck in there. We allow you to take it to an ATM and withdraw cold hard dollars if you want to. And with Boost, what we wanted to do was something completely unique. So if you have a debit card in the United States, it's unlikely you have any sort of loyalty program connected to it. But we wanted to give you in-the-moment savings, because in our mind, that is yet another draw to it. So it's effectively a marketing expense for us. We looked at where people are using it. So as I said, mainstream across all the brands you would expect. And so today you pick your Boost of choice. And you can be really nimble with it. So I was joking with...
You can change it every 12 hours and digitally, right?
You can, yeah. I mean, I'm a CFO at heart, so I'm cheap. So last weekend, I normally get a Boost $1 off every coffee, because that's what I do first thing in the morning to get going. But I was in Chipotle with my son, and I'm like, oh, I haven't used my dollar today. I want to get my 10% off instead. And I could change it right there at the checkout.
Through the app.
And I could see it happen. That's the other thing, is most loyalty and rewards programs are things that happen, a month later when you get your monthly statement. And what's beautiful about how they've enacted it in the app is you actually right there and then see the total amount you were getting charged go down as you get that 10% off. So for us, it's just yet another way to grow that platform from the 7 million that you mentioned was as of the end of December, and the app has consistently been the #1 finance app downloaded at the App Store or Google Play, and it's gotten as high as, I think, number 4 or 5 in free apps. So it's becoming, we want it to be a daily use case.
Yeah, you had some celebrity tweet, that was tied to some celebrity tweet, but okay. But it's
inventive and
it's
how
up
they
there.
Market.
So where does this go long term? So you kind of nodded when I said it feels bank-like. What does this look like a couple of years down the road?
Sure. So, as I said, we have 3 pillars to our strategy: omnichannel, banking services, and international. And our goal on the banking services is, first of all, how do we get those 30 million, or at least there's about 18 million are truly underbanked. There's a bunch of unbanked, and we'd love to fix that too, but that's kind of an ID verification problem. But if we can bring all those underbanked folks up and onto the system, we think that's just a natural rising tide. You start combining it with what's going on our seller side, and now you have some really interesting interplays. Although the note I would make is our goal is not that becomes a currency or an on-us network, because I think we learned the lesson with Square Wallet where you don't have density. You actually need to open up the top of the funnel and allow a consumer to do whatever they would do, whether it's a Square merchant or not. And
so not that they have to find a Square merchant to use the service.
It's too limiting. In the end, people don't want to be told what to do with their money. They want to be able to make the choice they want to make. And so that's the goal with Cash App, is to keep it as wide as possible, but keep adding more and more utility for the consumer.
What happens with those funds that are sitting there?
Today, I mean, they're effectively funds held on behalf of customers. You can see on our balance sheet, I think it was about $209 million sitting on our balance sheet as of the end of June, so as of the end of Q2. So it's definitely a big balance. And we're starting to think about, are there other things we could do for our customers there? Maybe help them think through savings.
With that
balance, yeah. Because how can we help them make their money work for them? So lots of ideas on the table, and the team is a really great team in terms of fast-paced experimentation.
It sounded like you were going to say one of those ideas or ideas you're talking about.
If I told you that, I'd have to.
I thought you said the word savings.
There could be things like savings, investment. We actually already allow people to purchase Bitcoin, for example, which we think of as allowing them access to an asset. So it was definitely probably jumping 3 steps ahead of what people might do the first with an account.
Yep.
But we wanted to grab hold of a moment in time and really, as a payment innovator, understand crypto, understand what it would mean to move crypto from person to person. And so it's the fastest, easy way. If you've never bought a piece of a Bitcoin, Cash App is the way to do it. It's seconds, and it's in your account, and you can decide, am I holding it because I think it's going to go up, or is it time to trade out?
You're not promoting Bitcoin on my stage right now.
No,
okay.
I'm just saying it's a utility that you have.
And you mentioned, I think, there could be other types of investments that you think about offering?
Absolutely. I think, anything you do today with a bank account, you should look to Cash App to begin to emulate more and more of that.
Okay. Jump to the lending business for a little bit.
Yeah.
Square Capital is now, I don't know exactly how many years old, but I'm going to say
4 years old.
I was going to say 3.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 years old. Lending to merchants in your system. A lot of fintech companies now offering different lending services to their customers, even Stripe dabbling, testing it out. All these companies have operated in a pretty good, all these services have operated in a pretty good economic climate. Like, how do you think about, are you already starting to safeguard against what happens when our economy doesn't look like it, and what does that look like?
So Capital is probably one of my most favorite products because it gets back to what small businesses are traditionally not allowed access to, which is access to capital to grow. We see this over and over again. Like, some of the stats show that 40% of small businesses won't even ask for a loan from a bank because they just believe they'll get turned down. So they don't even go out and look for a way to invest in their business. Capital today, we've done about $3 billion of lending. Our average loan size is about $6,000. So these are going out to small businesses. In terms of managing risk, we really thought about it in 3 ways. The first is we have access to your point of sale and to your payments data, which is an amazing signal when you want to understand the risk. And from when Square was born, we thought about risk differently. So we've always been using machine learning, now deep learning, to make sure that as we use those signals, plus others, that we're making the right underwriting decision. So that's kind of rule 1 in terms of managing risk. The second piece is these are very short duration loans. Effectively, what we facilitate is about an 8 to 9 month loan. So to the extent the environment is changing, it allows us to be a lot more nimble. They're not like 3, 4, or 5 year term loans. The third thing, which originally, I'd love to say we were super smart and we just saw it, but something we thought was a bug became a feature. So we actually allow people to match their repayment to how their business is trending. And that's because the way you repay is based off of every swipe. So if you have an amazing...
It's percentage of daily sales.
Percentage of daily sales.
Yep.
So if you have an amazing December, you'll pay back a lot. And if January you decide to go on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks, you pay back 0. And what that does is it allows businesses to actually smooth out to pay back alongside what their working capital is doing. And so most small businesses actually go out of business, not because they didn't have the cash flow, but they just didn't have it at the time. And so by making that match, we think we keep our businesses much more healthy. And then the final piece for Square, so sitting in my chair of keeping Square safe, we ultimately true sale on those loans off our balance sheet to third-party investors. So
explain that for people who might not know.
So effectively, when we originate a loan with a seller, we package that up and we sell that on to third-party investors They love it because it's actually the default rates on Square Capital have been, are approximately 4%. So this has been a great returning asset. And so they're getting to invest in something that normally wouldn't be open to them, and we get to take it away from our balance sheet, so it's not balance sheet risk to Square ultimately.
But do you see a shakeout? I mean, it's inevitable that, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 5 years.
I mean, with any cycle, you've got to be watching the cycle. And so that's actually something I say all the time when I talk to investors. The great thing about machines is they're watching second by second. And so they are literally changing, in a way the human eye cannot see. If the environment starts to get worse, the machine models or machine learning models will effectively start dropping, first of all, the size of loan that we're willing to facilitate. And then some people will start dropping below the hurdle. And we have seen this in microcosms, right? The US broadly hasn't gone through a recession, but you've seen recessions in different smaller parts of the US, like the shale states, for example. So we can watch and actually see that the models are responding. Another good example is actually when weather happens, so hurricanes or whatever the heck is going on outside these windows right now. We could see that our capital models were really narrowing down what they would offer, and it's because over a 2 or 3 day period when perhaps stores were shuttered because of a hurricane, the capital model would think your business had just gotten dramatically worse. It was like a major recession had just happened to you in a 3-day period, but it would take the models 2, 3, 4 weeks to actually recover, when in actual fact, a human being would say, oh, no, that's behind us, now just go back to where you were, but you could actually see the models reacting in real time. So, I don't want to say that we're, perfect, but I do think the way we've approached risk as a company is a core competitive advantage. So whether it's on the payment side, whether it's in areas like instant deposit, in lending with Square Capital, right, I really do feel we've brought technology to bear.
One more topic I want to get to.
Sure.
We're going to have questions in about 3 or 4 minutes, so if you have them, line up. If you don't, think of some good ones. You started an organization many years ago now called Ladies Who Launch, correct?
Yeah.
Which encourages and nurtures women in technology. Is that?
So not just technology, so think more Main Street businesses.
Yep.
So what I'm looking for is women who are just starting their own businesses. So it could be everyone from like Emily at Glossier, who you had here yesterday, down to
today. She's coming.
today.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was yesterday. So
yeah.
Amazing woman entrepreneur. We have an event coming up in St. Louis next week, so total blatant shout out for it. But I have women that have done everything from making the most amazing swimsuits to belts for kids, to technology companies that do things for maternal health, like you name it. Like women are amazingly entrepreneurial. But what I find, and the reason behind the nonprofit is, community is really important. All the stats show women do much better when they get peer mentorship. Second, education. Often they feel like they don't know how to build a business plan or how to go about getting a loan. In fact, capital, 56% of our loans go into women, and the background rate in the US is about 15%.
Wow.
That is how bad it is for a woman trying to get funded for her business. And then the third piece is just inspiration. So we've had everyone from like Joe Malone spoke in London, the keynote speaker coming up in San Francisco is Hint Water, if you know Cara Golden, just like women who've kind of been there, done that. But what I think is important is to know that while their journey might look straight up and to the right, it looks more like this. And sometimes it's very down and not fun. And I think sharing those stories is really important for women to stay resilient and really do all that they can do.
Specifically in the technology industry, we look at the tops of companies. We look at board of directors makeup. Yep. You're now on the board of Walmart and also Slack.
Yeah.
Which is an addiction at work that is not always healthy, but we won't get into that. Look around, a company like Amazon that I cover very closely. Of their top 18 executives, 17 are men, white men. 17 are men. Like, I don't understand, like, that's embarrassing. I don't understand how in 2018 businesses great global companies are still doing business this way. Like, what do you see? Square's a bit different, right?
Yeah.
Why it feels like not much progress over the last few years, despite the conversation. So,
Sure.
what do you think's happening?
So you're just going to wind me up now.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, Square, we firmly believe you can't be what you can't see. And so, first of all, just for getting great talent into the organization, we want to make sure that we show diversity up and down the organization. I'm really proud that over half of actually I think it's over 60% of the organization reports into a woman at the executive team level. And total kudos to Jack, by the way, because that has to be a tone at the top. Second thing is, like, how can you know what your customers want if you don't look anything like them? And so you need that divergent perspective happening, whether it's at your executive table, at your board table, as you do any sort of planning, right? Again, how do you push that into the organization? It's not just gender, it's every kind of form of diversity you can think of.
It seems like it should be a business imperative, right?
It is just sound business. In fact, again, every stat shows that companies, for example, that have more gender diversity of the executive team or gender diversity of the board are actually better for shareholder returns. Like, if I told you here's a single factor, why don't you go act on it? And yet, Fortune 500 CEOs, for example, where it should be 250 of them, because I can do basic math, is like 23 or something. It's gotten worse in the last 5 to 10 years. So there is definitely systemic bias. I think it's in all of us to figure out how do we take that systemic or that unconscious bias out of how we all act and react, and it's in all of us, but it's absolutely, you can train yourself to feel the bias, but then react in a different way to it. And again, I would kind of, really just cajole and like ask of senior leadership, whether it's boards, like, why aren't you doing more? And it should be an embarrassment when you're not doing more.
Yep. So wait, do you get answers when? I'll try.
I think you get a lot of platitudes,
yeah.
and I get a lot of people who explain to me how it's gotten better, and that drives me absolutely crazy.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I see someone about to jump up. Please tell us who you are, please.
Hi, I'm David Escamilla with Abdeal, and I'd like to know what the 2 major product innovations that serve merchants that have brought you the most joy over the past couple of years, and how you might delight merchants in the future.
Sure, that is a great question.
Did you pay him?
No,
okay.
But I'd be happy to cash you later. I think, okay, so I can answer it in 2 forms, because you can probably hear in my voice, Square Capital is definitely right up there, because I think it really broke free into small businesses, access to capital. And then I think this coming together now of Omni is the thing that really makes me happy. But I'll tell you, on a side note, I love just when I talk to the most teeny tiny businesses and they tell me the story of how they were going to miss that sale, or they saw people walk away from their farmer's market stall, and suddenly with Square they feel like they're a credentialized professional business. And I was in San Francisco on Friday coming back from an event, and there was a guy busking. It's actually on my Twitter feed. But I love that he had his cash handle, and it said, no cash, no problem. And so if we're even getting to a world where you can put something out there that's totally anonymized, right? I don't need to know his email address or his phone number, anything personal about him. I just know that he's cash tag, I can't even remember what his cash tag was, but that I could quickly send him like $3-5 or whatever for his busking. Like, those things give me joy, because you start to see how everyone's getting accepted up onto this network that up to that point had kind of discriminated against them.
Here's one.
Hi, Fazal Yamin from GP Shopper. How do you think about the international market and how that fits into your plans to expand?
Yeah, international is a great question. So a couple of things. This year, we stayed very focused on the core markets we were in. So US, Canada, Japan, Australia, UK, which is not a global footprint, right? It's a good start footprint, but not a global footprint yet. And the great thing about all those markets is we see the same hallmarks of lots of small businesses where there's a lot of greenfield. So before you even need to go kind of club competitors to death and like move out all the old stuff, there's just a lot of market development of helping small businesses understand that cash is expensive, right? Cash is It tends to shrink, it tends to slide into people's pockets in a way it shouldn't. It costs you time because you've got to travel to and from the bank to put it in or take it out. It's usually because you think of it as something you have to keep really secure. It's often the business owner that is the person at the end of the day literally counting bills. Like if you think about it, it's the least value add thing you could or should be doing, and yet it's often what the most senior person in the business spends their time on. So we spend a lot of time doing market development in any country. The UK is super top of mind for us right now because of that stat that 50% of businesses don't accept payments. As we go into next year, there's kind of two other vectors as we think international. The first is Weebly, who we bought. So being an online-only business, Weebly is already 40% of revenue is coming from outside the US, and they're in 100 plus countries because they're effectively anywhere that online happens, they can be. And then Cash is the other interesting one. So it's not a hardware-dependent business. They launched in the UK. It was a pretty fast launch, given how young the Cash App business is. It's only 3-ish years old. And so to already be in the UK, and then what was interesting is the minute we launched in the UK, the main question we got was, great, can I now send money from the UK to the US? Well, not yet. We can't do cross-border, but it's always really edifying when you hear your customers.
Is that something you could tackle eventually?
I mean, absolutely, we could and should. I love when our customers are telling us what they need or want. And think about real corridors like US to Mexico, US. I mean, again, these are places where I think the current system really lets down the people most in need. So think about how much it costs you to send money from US to Mexico, for example. And those are exactly the people that can't afford to spend $25 or $50 to send small amounts of money. So absolutely, as Square unfolds over the next decade plus, like these are all areas that I think we can go innovate in and really kind of make it ultimately a much more fair system.
What's the biggest thing Square isn't doing well today that you think to sort of fulfill the vision of that the leadership team, including yourself, has for the company, you need to either do better or tackle over the next 2 years?
Sure. So I would say international, because I think to date, you know, I absolutely dream that the company's going to have global impact. And so when you start with more offline mode, so you need hardware, that is like a slow going because you got to get PCI compliance, regulatory compliance, you know, moving money with the bank's compliance, right? There's a lot of impediments to fast motion. But I think we have an unlock, but we really need to lean in on that. And then I would say the second part is awareness. Like, we actually do a lot, but most of what we run into is that particularly bigger businesses don't think of us that way. They think of us as like, oh yeah, no, I saw that when I saw the pop-up, or I saw that when I was in the farmer's market. And we need to show them more and more examples of really big businesses that are utilizing Square and reinventing how they do commerce.
You think there's a day where public market retailers or e-commerce companies are using Square?
I absolutely. I mean, I already see it happening. Whether it's in, you know, parts of their business, so we don't have the whole book of business, or, you know, like I said, we have merchants that do $100 million plus on Square already. I mean, those are pretty big businesses. I see a lot of like things like franchises. Like we have a car cleaning company up and down the West Coast that has, you know, multiple locations. Even Blue Bottle Coffee, right? We love Blue Bottle because we love coffee at Square, but Blue Bottle is in the US and in Japan, opening up new coffee shops all over the place, and they have a really vibrant wholesale business. And so it's on us to how do we take that whole book of business, because ultimately then the merchant has just a single view of what they sell. And that's really what the merchant cares about.
Great, Sarah. I think we're
Thanks,
all out
Jason.
of time. Thanks so
Thank you
much.
All.